In the span of 40 years, Charles Schwab became one of the richest men in America, built some of the largest mansions in the country, and lost it all, spending his final years with but a few pennies in his pocket. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. This video is brought to you in part by Victorian Society in America. More on them later. Charles Schwab was born in the small Pennsylvania town of Williamsburg, but grew up in Loretto. In 1879, at 17 years old, he set out for Braddock, a smoky steel town outside Pittsburgh, and took a job clerking at a dry goods store for about $10 a month. The store happened to sell cigars to Captain William R. Jones, the legendary superintendent of Andrew Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Steel Works just down the street. Jones liked the bright, talkative boy and within months hired him as a stake driver in the engineering corps, tripling his income to $1 a day. By 19, he was Jones' right-hand man. At 25, after Jones passed away in a fatal furnace accident, he was named superintendent of the Homestead Works. By 35, he was president of the Carnegie Steel Company itself. In December 1900, at a private dinner at the University Club in Manhattan, Schwab stood up in front of J.P. Morgan and laid out the case for combining Carnegie's empire with Morgan's holdings into a single steel colossus. Morgan listened. Within months, Schwab was the broker who convinced his old boss to sell. The price Carnegie wrote on a slip of paper and had Schwab hand to Morgan was exactly $480 million. The resulting United States Steel Corporation, formed in 1901, was the first billion-dollar company in the world, and Schwab, now 39, was named its first president, earning more than $2 million a year, the modern equivalent of nearly $80 million per year. But he did not stay there long. In January 1902, on a European trip, he stopped at the casino at Monte Carlo and lost a fortune at the roulette tables. The New York papers were merciless. Carnegie, who had a Calvinist horror of gambling, cabled in fury, telling Schwab he had disgraced him. Schwab's relationship with the U.S. Steel Board never recovered, and in 1903, tangled in a separate calamitous investment in shipbuilding, he resigned. It looked briefly like an ending, but it was actually the beginning of his real career. Schwab had ended up holding a controlling interest in a small specialty steel and armor plate maker called Bethlehem Steel, and he poured himself into it. In 1905, against the advice of nearly every engineer he consulted, he bought the American rights to a beam rolling process. The Gray Mill could roll a wide-flanged structural beam in one piece, wider and lighter and cheaper than anything else on the market. The first Bethlehem beams came off the line in January 1908, and the age of the modern American skyscraper essentially begins there. The Woolworth Building was built of them, so were Gimbel Brothers, the Chicago Merchandise Mart, and dozens of others. Under Schwab, Bethlehem became the second largest steel producer in the United States. The First World War made him richer still. Bethlehem became an arsenal for the Allies, churning out armor plate, projectiles, cannons, and ships, and its stock climbed from the low double digits to a wartime peak of 700. By the early 1920s, his personal fortune was estimated at somewhere between $25 and $40 million. He owned a private railway car named Loretto that had cost $100,000 by itself. He was a celebrity of the same magnitude as Carnegie or Frick, but where those men were cool and reserved, Schwab was warm, theatrical, and irredeemably extravagant. He had a passion for owning the biggest and the best of everything, and by then, he had 3 houses to prove it. The first of them stood in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Schwab built it in 1890 when he was 28. Schwab and his wife Urena lived there only a few years before selling it to a Carnegie subsidiary as a residence for future superintendents of the mill. The second house was the one closest to his heart, and the one he intended as a redemption of childhood. In Loretto, he built the estate known as Immigrant, with a 44-room mansion designed an austere Renaissance revival by the New York firm of Murphy and Dana. It was built of smooth, buff gray Indiana limestone with tiled roofs, gabled dormers, and crenellated chimneys. Below it, falling away to the south down the steep hillside, the New York landscape architect Charles W. Levitt Jr. laid out a series of sunken Italian gardens with 9 cascading waterfalls feeding 3 reflecting pools and a Versailles-inspired fountain at the bottom. The estate cost roughly $3 million and required a staff of about 100 gardeners and 15 indoor servants. A reservoir disguised as a medieval stone fortress watered both the estate and the town, and there were sculptures, including bronzes commissioned by Paul Manship, the same Manship who would later sculpt the Gilded Prometheus at Rockefeller Center. But for all of it, for Laredo and Braddock and the mill houses and the private railway car, it was the third house, the great chateau on the Hudson, that defined Schwab in the public imagination, and that gave the era one of its most extravagant residences. Of the three steel titans who built showpiece houses in Manhattan, Charles Schwab was the only one who refused to go to Fifth Avenue. Carnegie built his restrained Georgian manse at 91st Street, which would in time become the Cooper Hewitt Museum. Frick built his Beaux-Arts Palace on 70th Street, which would later become the Frick Collection. Schwab went west. When friends asked why he was building on the wrong side of Central Park instead of Millionaire's Row, Schwab is said to have answered that Carnegie and Frick had more money than he did, but he was getting more value for his dollars than they were. In the 1880s and 1890s, the real estate establishment had been confident that Riverside Drive, with its uninterrupted view of the Hudson and the Palisades, would draw the very richest New Yorkers north and west into a string of freestanding villas. By the late 1890s, it was already clear that this prophecy was failing. The Upper East Side was winning, but Schwab had refused to listen, even to his wife, who had begged him not to live so far removed from society. In 1901, the financier Jacob Schiff had bought and then quietly let go of the full block on Riverside Drive between 73rd and 74th Streets because Mrs. Schiff would not move to the wrong side of Central Park. Schwab took the parcel for a then record $865,000 and commissioned a French architect, Maurice Hébert, to design the house. To supply the stone, Schwab opened a private quarry in Peekskill. Construction began in 1902 and was finished in 1906, involving more than 100 artists, designers, and craftsmen. The result was unlike anything else in the neighborhood. The house enclosed roughly 50,000 square feet on a 4-story chateau plan, freestanding on its own park-like grounds, set back from Riverside Drive with a 50-foot long descending toward the river. The cream-colored limestone walls were punctuated with carved dormers, multiple turrets, and a tall central tower whose pinnacles reached about 116 feet above the street. On its summit, the spire of the chapel offered panoramic views of the Hudson. Architectural critics of the day were divided. Some cooed that for design, richness of decoration, and completeness of detail, the house promised to surpass any city home in America, if not the world. Others sniffed that it was merely humdrum, a copyist work that might have succeeded had it been more faithful to its originals. The Schwab Mansion was the climax of French Renaissance architecture in New York, arriving just as the style was going out of fashion. Before we head inside, a quick word about the sponsor of today's video, Victorian Society in America. Are you captivated by historic architecture? Want to explore, learn, and dive even deeper into the past? With the Victorian Society in America, you'll have the chance to travel to American cities and tour stunning 19th century buildings, pursue learning through internationally acclaimed summer programs in American cities and abroad, including Chicago, Newport, and London to name a few. Additionally, members will enjoy a free subscription to 19th Century, the semi-annual publication packed with articles on art, architecture, preservation awards, and book reviews. Visit the website below in the video description and become part of the Victorian Society in America today. Thank you, Victorian Society in America, for sponsoring this video. Now back to our tour. The visitor entering through the principal west door stepped first into a vestibule guarded by a pair of bronze leaves, each weighing well over a ton. Beyond them opened a great hall, of which the pillars were carved marble and the paneling was South American mahogany. The great glory of the house, though, was its music. Schwab loved organ music, he could play himself, and wanted what amounted to the finest private organ in the world. He hired Archer Gibson, the organist of the Brick Presbyterian Church and the most sought-after private organist in the United States, to work directly with the architect and the engineers. The result was an extraordinary Aeolian instrument whose pipes ran behind walls, under floors and shaftways, and through closets from the basement to the attic, with not a pipe visible anywhere. The house itself, in effect, was the organ. It sat at the stair landing, large enough to seat a full orchestra. The amenities were unprecedented for a New York private house. There were 6 elevators. In the basement was a 20 by 30 foot indoor swimming pool of glazed brick under an arched glass roof, and beside it a 50-foot gymnasium and bowling alley. There was a wine cellar, a 4-car garage, a separate receiving lodge for incoming goods, and a service tunnel running beneath a sculpted garden so that tradesmen and deliveries would not disturb the lawns. The mansion had its own coal-fired plant and a refrigeration plant, and there was even an early air cooling system and an in-house telephone switchboard. The Schwabs did not entertain much. Raina Schwab had not wanted to leave Bethlehem for New York in the first place, and she dreaded the distance from the few friends she did have on Fifth Avenue, and as she gained weight in middle age, she gradually withdrew from society altogether, declining even invitations to the White House. Schwab, however, was happy as can be, and kept living as if the money would last forever. He gambled at the whist club, he played the stock ticker installed in his own library, he signed roughly $1 million in notes to friends and gave monthly allowances to dozens of relatives. Even before the 1929 stock market crash, he had spent most of his fortune. The crash finished the work. By 1933, he could no longer pay Riverside's annual property tax bill of about $60,000. He tried donating Riverside to the city to be used as an official mayoral residence, but Mayor LaGuardia, who lived modestly in East Harlem, simply did not think it appropriate for a servant of the people to live so lavishly, and declined. In January 1939, Urena passed away. Schwab closed up Riverside, moved into a small apartment on Park Avenue, and effectively waited to follow her. He died there that same year of heart disease at the age of 79. His holdings in Bethlehem Steel were essentially worthless. The Pennsylvania portion of his estate showed debts of more than $300,000. A separate New York accounting recorded bank debts of over $2 million. Had he lived any longer, he would have quite literally been living under a bridge. The houses, however, outlived him, all in very different ways. Immigrant went under the auctioneer's hammer in 1942 when the Friends of St. Francis College acquired it. Today, the great house is the Mount Assisi Friary. The Schwab-Dixon House in North Braddock still stands and has been meticulously restored. Riverside, the Great One, was not so fortunate. After Schwab moved out in 1939, the chateau sat empty. During the Second World War, parts of it were briefly subdivided into apartments, and a victory garden was planned on the once formal lawn. By 1947, it stood vacant and stripped, and that spring, the salvage sale of its interior fittings opened to a quiet crowd of about 100 onlookers. Some of the carved mahogany doors and marble pilasters were salvaged and ended up in Our Lady of Lebanon Cathedral in Brooklyn Heights. In 1948, the 2-ton wrecking ball came for the rest. The house was leveled, and the building that replaced it was almost cruelly named the Schwab House. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What are your thoughts on the mansions? Let me know down below in the comments section. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Victorian Society in America for sponsoring this video. Check out their link in the video description to find out how you can get involved today. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on This House.